All right, so welcome to Wagner Students for Criminal Justice Reform, episode 21. Today I'm speaking with Justin Farmer. Hello, Justin.
Hello, Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you. And I guess I'll just let you introduce yourself, Justin. Tell us where you're from and what your current role is, and then we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about.
I am Justin Farmer. I am on the Town of Hamden's Legislative Council. I represent the 5th District and I am the Majority Whip. Um, all of that long title is mostly to say that I represent local government here in Hamden, Connecticut. Um, and my duties cover, you know, making sure sidewalks are paved, making sure trees are trimmed. And then I also am one of 15 people who are in charge of a $230 million budget.
Cool. And if you don't mind me embarrassing you, could you tell us how old you are as well?
Well, one day longer, one day stronger, but I am 24 years young. Um,
Excellent.
yeah.
And so, to me, when I think of you and all you've done to get elected and how you're serving your local government, what it makes me think of is grassroots organization and effort. I remember your election. Yeah, go ahead. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Um, yeah, this time of year, especially with so many new people coming in, um, a lot of people talk about Alejandra Cortez.
Hmm.
For me, that resonates more so because I like to think of myself as an activist elected official.
Hmm.
And in that capacity, um, over a year ago, the campaign that I ran had 5 or 6 friends. We knocked doors and knocked doors probably 6 or 7 hours a day.
Wow.
Um, I raised $800 3 weeks before the election. I borrowed from my school money because I'm a student at Southern Connecticut State University taking classes.
Hmm.
Um, and I had to borrow from the money I had for school to pay for the campaign. I wasn't sure I was going to make up all the money in time for classes. And my opponent raised $6,000.
Wow.
She outspent us 6 times.
Yeah.
Um, I was printing literature on white pieces of paper, added text, put on a couple of pictures, came up with different ideas. Um, Hamden's incredibly diverse. I ended up having my lit translated into 8 other languages and just went from different community members saying, well, you understand Spanish, and obviously I need to speak to these people in our community. Can you help translate, our message, what we want to do for the community? Um, so my campaign was very grassroots, where I ended up winning the primary by 23 votes, four over the
Woohoo.
mandatory recount.
Uh-huh.
Um, and by the general election, I was helping other people in other districts, and I had the largest turnout of any district, beating the mayor in my own district by 50 votes. Um,
Wow.
so,
So what do you attribute that to? Do you think speaking to people in their own language was what caused them to support you, or what do you think was one or a few of the most successful components in that?
well, I also think we didn't run a traditional campaign. As all of this was going on, I was doing street cleanups all throughout. So there were days where I would start the day extra early, doing
Mhm.
street cleanings or doing a cleanup, and then literally shower, change clothes, and leave friends finishing cleaning up after doing 3 or 4 hours of cleaning.
Mhm.
Take 5 minute shower and then go knock doors for another
Doors.
6 hours.
Mhm.
Um, we have See Click Fix. It's a application where you can report issues that are going on in town.
Oh,
So
okay.
as I was walking, I'm reporting sidewalks that are broken. I'm reporting blight. Saying this needs to be here, that needs to be here. Um, Something else that we did that was different was on election night itself, we set up a portable station, a battle station, if you will, um,
Mhm.
and had a table outside at the polling location and having people make cold calls from the polling station. Um,
Wow.
and then had drivers. I had two or three people. Um, by the end of the campaign, I pretty much had everyone at some point who was working against me working with me because we were everywhere all the time where it just became all right. Well, even if I don't agree with you on this or that, I know that you'll do the work.
That's the most important piece. Wow. So where did you learn that? Is it intuition or did you have a mentor?
I had an interesting couple of years predating to this. I did a lot of activism in New Haven,
Hmm.
which is our neighboring sister city.
Yeah.
Um, Activism is a vital part of New Haven. You have groups like Ulada Action that work on undocumented and immigrant rights. They work with people who are being deported, work on wage theft. I've been honored to work with them and learn from them. Um, the labor unions here, you have Unite here. Probably the first 2 or 3 years out of high school, I spent a lot of my time organizing with them. Um, Showing up for racial justice. Surge is another group. I intern at Planned Parenthood. So
Hmm.
New Haven's a hotbed of activism where you have so many groups. And I spent a lot of my time hopping from one group to another, just learning how people organize and what they do. Um, and I just ended up adding those elements to the campaign as I went. So, like doing street cleanups was something that I had seen the unions do before, and I just incorporated it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Throwing a fundraiser was something that I actually learned through my experiences at Planned Parenthood. That, within 3 or 4 days, I was able to make $600.
Wow.
Um, to which this is from someone who's never raised any money to raising a ton of money in a very
Right.
short time. Um, and then DSA, Democratic Socialists of America,
Hmm.
I've worked with them, and being a member, I had a couple of friends come out and help where so many people work with labor or work with other organizations that, I was talking to one person, they're like, hey, well, why don't you just translate that into Arabic? Well, I don't really know Arabic. I know Arabic. I'll translate
Hmm.
it for you.
Cool. So relying on a network and experience. So at NYU, at Wagner, we study a lot about advocacy, and it's really cool to hear what works because you almost just never know. And you just sometimes go on your gut and sometimes go on your experience, and you can read theory about it, but when it really
Hey,
works, that makes a big difference and helps inform the next time. So thanks for sharing all that with us. So, as far as criminal justice reform, I know you have a lot of interest in this area, so I guess I'll just hand it over to you. What do you think right now, or for you personally, is a big issue or an area of change that might be coming? What do you see in this area?
you, one of the toughest challenges of being a urban legislator is that we use coded words like urban to talk about people who are black and brown to work on issues. Um, there's obviously disparities, um, but not being able to talk about certain situations and have the vocabulary to talk about it
No.
causes a slew of problems. A couple of months
Mm-hmm.
ago, no, almost a year ago now, um, I started there was a young man, and I say young man, he was 10 years old.
Wow.
Um, his family, this kid, we have a special education PTA. His family went, um, and we had a conversation with the former chief and myself to talk about um, policing with children with disabilities. Now, I happen to
Mhm.
have Tourette's, a movement disorder,
Mhm.
and at times have looked sporadic. Um, so far, I've been stopped 32 times by police,
Wow.
and I've had an experience and understanding of how to deal with situations, especially when I might not be able to control my words or my movements, and to
Mhm.
articulate myself in a way that I can explain what I'm about, what my intentions are, and to come out of these situations in the best light possible. Um, as we were having these conversations, a lot of parents have this conception that all you have to do is introduce your kids to police and then you'll be fine.
Mm.
Um, that they'll understand your kid's disability, they'll understand who they are, and everything would be fine. A week later, that young man was in handcuffs um, at
At
10
age
years old,
10. Wow.
and having the conversation with people, it just between people on the school side, people from the police department. Uh,
So what do
I
you think
think
the problem? Yeah, go ahead.
no, I think part of the problem is not being able to have these conversations in the context or to see how to solve these issues.
Mhm.
But we're institutional racism, institutional homophobia, institutional sexism. These are things that happen that are predicated off of systems that work that way. And
Mhm.
I think we often get caught up in the moment of we don't want to be offended or we don't want to offend anyone, so we take it personally.
Mm.
But to build a better community, we can't take these issues personally. We have to see them for what they are and be able to talk about them. Um,
So,
and say, like, yeah, I might be complicit in a system that causes harm, but I want to advocate for harm reduction.
mm, mm. Who do you think should be starting those conversations then?
I think, and that's the other thing, is that everyone is part of that conversation.
Mhm.
The reason why uh, I kind of joked with the parents with kids with disabilities. I'm like, yeah, the police are normal people. They've
Mhm.
seen kids with disabilities before. They've interacted with kids with disabilities before. Knowing that doesn't automatically give them the knowledge to
Mm.
know how to deal with situations. And that's the same for race, sex,
Yeah.
um, immigration status. Just because we know these things, it doesn't mean that we've been trained to understand how to handle these situations in the best light. And by and
Specifically, yeah, yeah, go ahead. Mhm.
no, when we fail to have honest conversations, we fail to find honest solutions. And a passive peace is silence through violence. So not having these conversations, despite them being tough, despite them being hard, we actually put ourselves in harm. And then we further compound the issue by saying we don't have this issue or this issue is worse somewhere else. So we don't have to worry about the escalation of X, Y, or Z because that only happens in these places and that can't happen here. And that's
Mm.
just a fallacy.
Yeah. I really like what you said about police, how, yeah, some of them have children with disabilities. They have neighbors who have children with disabilities, or their spouses work in education, that, but somewhere there's a disconnect when they're on the job. And it's almost as if people can forget their own personal experience because you have this hat on, um, of,
Uh,
of protecting and serving, that suddenly feels different, or the situation could have been different.
I went on a road trip yesterday, and somehow I ended up having what I call a cardigan moment where I started to talk about I wondered how tax money paid for this road and how it stayed so smooth despite it being in the middle of nowhere and who granted it and what contractors they used. These
Hmm.
are just the vocabulary I've picked up being on council, and sometimes it's just like, oh yeah, people are just enjoying the scenery,
Hmm.
um, and how smooth the ride is. They don't necessarily think about the cost of the road
Mm.
or the bidding process or whether they use salt or they use a compound with what do you call it? With I forget the laxative that it's called again.
Oh, uh-huh.
But that it it these are things that it happens in every profession.
Yeah.
Um, that you know, sometimes we have to step back and we have to have people from different walks of life to be in those conversations and make sure that they not only have a seat at the table, but they're not on the menu. Because
Mm,
oftentimes we'll invite people to have seats at the table, expecting them not to contribute or diminishing their contributions.
mm. So getting everyone involved and on par, and being able, well, certainly be able to facilitate a more meaningful conversation as well, when people feel like they can contribute, and that what they have to say matters, and people will take it just as seriously as if someone else says something. So I appreciate that. I think that's really great advice. Any other issues important to you regarding criminal justice?
Um, Community policing. It, it, it's a terminology that we often use, but
Mm-hmm.
right now, New Haven is fighting for a civilian review board, and by extension, there are other municipalities that are looking forward to having a civilian review board. Um, when we talk about community policing, we talk about urban areas having police in their community, playing basketball, showing
Yes.
them in a positive light. But in certain communities all across this country, we don't have community policing.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have community policing in, you know, you're not going to have community policing in the Silicon Valley, but you'll have community policing in Oakland.
In Oakland, yeah.
And there's reasons for that where there's over policing of communities, and rather than come up with contracts of how we engage with each other, these social contracts, we often use the police to solve issues. It makes it harder for the police because oftentimes they're not trained to deal with certain situations, or they only have so many tools in their tool belt. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so having real conversations on what community policing looks like and what community stewardship is, having more of a village mentality where everybody holds everyone accountable and everyone's accountable to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and the police are part of that process, is a
Mm-hmm.
truer form of community policing rather than if something goes on, make sure to tell the police. If you
Yeah.
see something, say something. And this idea that police being normal people but in their uniform,
Mm-hmm.
as if that should divorce them for their job. One
Yeah.
more thing I want to touch on is
Yeah.
the growing hardships that police are having. Um,
Yeah.
the less it's the police need to have these conversations, but it's also us in the community that need to have these conversations. When we shy away from these conversations, we make police jobs harder, especially the police that are doing what they're supposed to be doing or are going above and beyond the call of duty.
Mm-hmm.
When we decide to not talk about these issues and hold police who are not upholding our laws or allowing for laws that we know will disenfranchise certain groups of people, we put police in a situation where there are less qualified people who are applying. And the more negative situations happen, the less likely people want to be police officers themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
people who do want to be police officers often, if I have 50 positions to fill
Yeah.
and I only have 67 people apply, and
Mm-hmm.
20 of those people are racist, sexist, homophobic, ageist, or have anger issues, people that I would normally not
Mm-hmm.
hire, but
Mm-hmm.
because I
Have a
need to
need.
hire a certain amount, I know I'm going to have to hire those people. And the more and more people who have a negative feeling towards policing, who would be wonderful police, who would understand policing in a village, in a community setting, people who would be public servants because that's what they are.
Mhm.
They would rather work on the other ends of criminal justice system, whether that be public defendant, working in criminal
Mhm.
justice reform,
Mhm.
working as advocates, rather than be police and work on the street in that capacity.
Mm.
Um, and that's something that I think a lot about. Anytime a crime happens, we have a lot of fear mongering where we say,
Yeah.
this happened, therefore we need more police to prevent this from happening, rather than statistically, this hasn't happened in a long time, and there's a probability of this happening. But because this happened, it doesn't mean that we need more police, especially as we see trends of violent crime and crime in general go down in America. It's very
Mhm.
concerning to see our prison population increase.
Still increase. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, Justin Farmer, you have given us a lot of really important things to think about, and we appreciate your perspective and your experience. And I just thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Yes, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Happy New Year to everyone who's listening and safe travels.
Yep. And good luck to you. Thanks, Justin.
Bye bye.